Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pojo. Some news and announcements. We have a change up in the schedule for the quarterly championship, so if that's something that you care about, you should go check that out. Basically, we are getting a slightly reduced schedule. There's going to be less of those like weekly grind tournaments, and also you will share QCP between your Expedition and Throne QCP, which means that if you want to qualify for both events, you only have to grind enough 25 QCP between those two. So that should be quite a bit of a reduction for people who are like really working hard on tournament stuff, which did include me. I am pretty pleased to see this, and we'll be working on getting a buy for both tournaments, since you can actually with 25 to 75 qualify and get a buy in both tournaments and compete in both tournaments if you feel the need. So that's going to be pretty exciting. I am super stoked about it, and yeah, let's talk now about the new spoilers and the new mechanic Corrupted, all of which were announced this week. We have a batch of community spoilers and we have the new mechanic, so let's get right into it. There's a ton of cards to go through. First off, we have Abyssal Scrying. Draw cards equal to the highest cost among your relics. As a fast spell, oh, that's a dangerous one. So if you're playing like Temporal Distortion, this draws 6 cards, similar to something like Brilliant Idea, but honestly, Brilliant Idea might be better for Temporal Distortion because then you are able to draw a lot more cards in the late game. So there's some sort of interesting matchup stuff there. But obviously, this card does draw a ridiculous amount of cards on turn 5 off of an Eternity Core, or turn 4 off of an Eternity Core if you are ramping with Power Stone, that kind of thing. So there's some real potential for this one to take over a Throne matchup. I don't know how good it's going to be in Expedition, but generally something that draws this many cards at fast spell speed could be pretty dangerous, and depending on what kind of relic people are playing, that could definitely end up being something that you have to worry about. Also notably works with Cursed Relics. Avagraft is a 4-card draw off of this, and 6 is really not that unreasonable a cost. This seems like it could actually be pretty powerful, despite the fact that it is a significant opportunity cost for that like value that you're getting. There's a lot of risk involved in taking an entire turn off to cast Abyssal Scrying, but if you can reduce the cost of it, if you can get a significant amount of cards that are free, or in some way like actually take advantage of those cards, yeah, this card's kind of disgusting and could end up leading to some pretty unfun games. There's actually going to be a couple of designs in, I think, this spoiler set in particular that I'm not too high on, and this really is one of them. This is just like a lot of cards for not a lot of reason. I'm generally fonder of drawing cards as a win condition than many of the other options, like generating like very boring tokens. Typically, if you're drawing cards to win and you draw a billion cards and you're in the position to win the game, at least you're going to do something exciting with those cards. But yeah, like nonetheless, this is something that could potentially get a little bit irritating depending on what kind of situation you're in. But overall, seems pretty cool. All right, next up, Affliction Kirin. It's so good. It's a 1/1 flyer. Spells and weapons cost 1 more. Mastery 2, play all power cards from your hand. So it's a fantastic revelation on a stick, except that you do have to get the mastery to play all of the power cards in your hand, which is not really all that good. Typically, it's pretty hard to get that kind of mastery going, and also you have to draw a bunch of power cards to make it worth it. But still, that's something that does make a lot of sense if you're playing with like Voice of the Speaker type decks, Seek Powers, that kind of thing. This is a card that is actually just a little bit dangerous, and it's fairly hard to remove because it is a 1/1 that makes weapons and spells cost 1 more. So it's harder to kill with relic weapons, it's harder to kill with spells, and it's a flyer, so it's not very easy to kill with creatures either. This thing could conceivably carry you to victory if it weren't for the fact that it also makes it very hard to carry weapons due to, once again, the fact that it makes weapons cost 1 more to cast. But even so, this seems like a thing that you might end up sticking a Sodi Spellshaper on, or something along those lines, just to like drift across while your opponent has to cast more expensive spells to deal with the thing that you're doing. I think that's got some real potential, just for the fact that like that spell and weapon thing is very disruptive to your opponent's strategies. If you're playing a big creature-focused strategy that just wants to play like a bunch of power cards, this is something that conceivably could be useful in Expedition. In Ranked, I think it's way too slow and way too weak to effectively do anything, but it notably doesn't die to Vara's Favor because it makes Vara's Favor cost 3. So yeah, there's some interesting things going on here. Like, this is a card that makes Seek Power not good, Vara's Favor not good, Roland's Favor not good, and like if you're playing a sort of like interesting to aggressive combo deck with creatures, this may actually have a pretty strong place, because that ability to make your opponent suffer while not necessarily playing spells and weapons yourself, yeah, that could get real interesting real fast. And that mastery also has a touch of something interesting interesting to it. This is a fascinating Johnny card, and I'm really excited to see if anyone builds anything cool out of it. Expedition, this is probably like a B. In Throne, it's more like a C, but yeah, there's some potential to do some interesting things with it in general. Okay, next up, Yeti Cookmaster. Okay. Sometimes the things aren't the right size. That's fine. Here we go. Yeti Cookmaster, 1/1. When you draw a card, Yeti Cookmaster gets +2 strength this turn. So it's a 3/1 most of the time because when you play it, it gets to become a 3/1. But notably, it's not a 3/1 on defense, so mediocre in both draft and expedition and completely unplayable in Throne. Notably, if you are doing some sort of like wisdom effect, this card becomes like a 5/1, but then it's a 5/1, which still not an amazingly statted unit. You can even go to like a 4/1 on a vanilla unit and feel okay with it. Like I think this is like a little bit skeptical, but potentially if you've got some removal draw type stuff going on in draft, this card could actually get really, really aggressive and do a lot of damage very, very quickly. It's also a card that your opponent basically just has to answer on board because like if you attack and then Wisdom of the Elders, then it becomes, you know, it's a 6/1 at that point. There's a lot of things happening there. Or is it, sorry, a 5/1, then it's a 5/1, but it'll be a 7/1 if you use a Wisdom of the Elders. Yeah, so there's some potential for this card to get really out of control, and that's kind of interesting. Notably weird art. Like, this art is very strange because the Yeti is large, which doesn't happen. There aren't any large Yetis. Yetis are traditionally like very, very small, and then we have like the Jotun birthing ritual thing that we've seen, which apparently transforms them into Jotun, and then they get very, very big very, very quickly. So a big Yeti is something different, and this is also just like a weird looking Yeti in general. But hey, it's cooking beef, I guess. It's an odd piece of art. That's all I'm saying. All right, so next up we have Blade Crafter. Blade Crafter is a 2/2. And this one is not a big spoiler, so we gotta move it. Okay. Everything is tricky. Actually, let's cover this last because that's going to be a corrupted setup. That'll allow us to review all these other cards without having to resize things. I spoke too soon, but yes, okay. Skeletal Dragon, 3-cost, 0/1 flying, summon strength equal to the highest strength unit in your void. So yeah, it's a cheap dragon. That's very notable. Doesn't cost a lot of influence, which is also pretty notable. Can get you like a pretty reasonable flyer. In a draft format, this card is actually pretty disgusting. It's similar to something like Scavenging Vulture, where it's a pretty cheap flyer, and then the ability to just deal a lot of extra damage in the air is very, very good. It doesn't matter how low the toughness is, although obviously it's a bit vulnerable to things like Greed's Reward, that kind of thing. On the other hand, we need more stuff that's vulnerable to Greed's Reward and that kind of thing because Skycrag is just kind of okay right now in draft. So cards like this that are really high risk, high reward are pretty interesting in that respect and could make Skycrag a little better while also making Shadow have to embrace some interesting and more risky strategies. Regardless, it's not really a very strong draft card, a strong Throne card. And expedition-wise, it's only mediocre. 3-cost dragon is definitely something that's like a little bit dangerous, as clearly we've seen so far. Like, there just haven't been a lot of them designed for the dragon decks, but this one is definitely a little bit under the mark, I would say. And if it weren't for the fact that it were dragon tribal, and dragon tribal is going to be very, very important, then this would be something that might not end up on anybody's list. But because it is dragon tribal and because it costs 3, maybe we'll see it in an expedition list. It's not a great card, though. Keeper Shield, 3/1, spellcraft, 3, play, reinforce. Okay, this is pretty cool. We get a decent amount of damage on a 3/1 weapon that also has the ability to be a 3/5 weapon. And those are really its only 2 modes. Like, you can't really do much else with this. If you have a lot of armor or the ability to become invulnerable to damage, which that's a little bit trickier, but there's some potential for that, then yeah, this card is a lot more aggressive. As it stands, it's mostly similar to Sword of Ikaria, but it doesn't have Warcry, and Sword of Ikaria was not a strong card in Throne, so don't expect to see this one in Throne. The reinforce ability, however, does put spells in the void, it does give you armor, and it does give you a pretty nasty weapon, so that flexibility could potentially lead you to a pretty interesting expedition play. I also like how it sets up, like it's a weapon that sets up a little bit for Razan, which is not something that you would generally see. There's like some ways that you can maybe make this work in Throne just because it plays a spell, but I would say that by and large, most of the time it is just valuable for its stat line, and its stat line is only okay at 6 and pretty good at 3. Neither of those are going to make it better than Magebreaker, which is currently the preeminent red card, but like it is at least hybrid, and it's a reasonable card to be picking up in a draft. So not bad common. Really nice art on this one, although the proportioning on it is really strange. Like there's some characters here who look a little interesting. Like we can zoom in on that. But yeah, like there's some interesting stuff going on with it where like, yeah, it's a pretty cool card, like really like cool art. And I think I really like how it got fit together. All right, next up we have Sorcerer's Wand. Abracadabra, Alakazam. It is a card in 3 different colors that once per turn you can pay 2 to stun an enemy unit, or draw a card, or give each of your units +1/+1 this turn. Yeah, and that's pretty interesting. I guess technically it doesn't say or on draw a card, but assumably yes, it is one of the 3 modes that you're getting out of it. So this is kind of cool. It's like a very expensive Eye of Winter that has the advantage of flexibility and just sort of being able to like play around with a bunch of different things. Also, it's a more expensive relic, which means that it's something that you can play with that 6-cost fast spell that we were talking about. Eye of Winter is generally a pretty strong card. I think it would be interesting in Expedition. You can do some cool things with it. I like that it's a more expensive version of it. I think that drawing a card is really interesting, and I think that giving each of your units +1/+1 each turn is also pretty interesting. None of these are particularly powerful effects. The card is not that great on rate, but it's an amazingly fun draft card, and Expedition-wise, it's definitely it could definitely belong in some sort of relic-focused yellow, green, blue deck, particularly with the advent of that fast spell that draws a bunch of cards. But yeah, it's not an easy thing to be doing. At the very least, at 7, it gives you some board position by stunning an enemy unit, so that's got some potential, but I don't see this card getting played in Throne very often, and Expedition-wise, it's only okay. Certainly Expedition is usually a faster format than this. All right. I think that's all the major ones. Nope, we have one more, Provoke the Dragons. This is a 2-cost, deal 2 damage, and all of your dragons go berserk. Yeah, this is another one that I'm not super heavy on in terms of like general use. Like I've recently been playing around with Cinder Clutch, which is another slow spell that cares about how many dragons you have, and like by and large haven't really found that to be particularly effective because as a rule dragons don't live very long, and if dragons live very long you're already winning. So Provoke the Dragons is a 2-cost, deal 2 damage, which okay, that's pretty nice. You can at least kill sites with that. It destroys Garden of Omens consistently, which is kind of important if you're dealing with like Skycrag lists. It also cares about spell damage a little bit more than Cinder Clutch, and it's probably going to deal damage a little bit more often than Cinder Clutch. In fact, I would say this is generally better than Cinder Clutch in most of those ways. Your dragons go berserk, however, that's not going to be a thing that you trigger too often. I don't know. This could feasibly come in if you are trying to just get like a little bit further along and you also want to have like a little bit of late game going on, but like it's also just a worse char in many ways, and getting that berserk ability is gonna be a lot harder than it looks to do consistently. Still, it can lead to like an extra 5 damage in the air if you've got the actual setup with the dragons. It can even lead to lethal if you manage to have a bunch of dragons and also somehow don't have control of the board. Either way, I think that it's a reasonably interesting option in a draft environment. It's pretty cool in Expedition, and you're just not going to see it in Throne. But yeah, overall, seems kind of neat. So yeah, there's some cool stuff there. All right, I think that's everything. Let's talk about Corrupted. So we have some new units, such as Bladecrafter here. Bladecrafter is a 2/2 that says summon, draw a weapon of your choice from your deck. Whoop. There we go. And has Corrupted 6. So, what does Corrupted 6 do, one might ask? Well, it has to do with the unit's summon effect. So the summon ability says draw a weapon of your choice from your deck. So any unit that has Corrupted is going to create a shade of itself when it dies that has the ability to be sacrificed for that Corrupted cost for the ability to replay the summon effect. So while it is a fairly simple text line on that front, there's also a lot of complication to it, and it does create very complicated tokens, which is important to notice. So Bladecrafter, for example, is a 2/2, and if it dies, then we're going to create a Bladecrafter's Shade. Bladecrafter's Shade says the same thing, except it is a 0-attack unit, which is important. It is a nightmare. And also, at the end of your turn, it gets -1 health, which happens every single turn, giving you a timer on when you can use Corruption. So Bladecrafter's Shade, for example, is only usable as its Entomb ability the turn after you have played it has been removed. Like if you, well, it's at the end of your turn, so 2 turns after it has been removed. So if this gets removed the turn that you play it, then you're going to lose it. It's going to be a 0-1, and then like when you start your next turn, you'll be able to sacrifice it to draw a weapon of your choice from your deck. This gives you a timer on an extra value that you can use. It also gives you a chump blocker, notably, that you can put in front of units, devour, sacrifice for particular sacrifice gains. There is a strong sacrifice theme right now in red, yellow, and purple, and red and purple are both definitely going to be colors in which corrupted exists. It's hard to say if it's going to be in time as well, but we have seen corrupted in green, so it's safe to bet that there will be some corrupted cards in every color. So yeah, this creates a really unusual kind of token where you have like a lot of different things to keep track of. Your health becomes a timer. You have the ability to pay a bunch of power to replay the summon ability, which can be used for card advantage. In the case of Bladecrafter Shade, it allows you to draw 2 weapons of your choice from your deck, which is very good if you're looking for some sort of like tutor-based effect. And finally, like you have the ability to sort of like block with it or use it to create some board state advantage. This is a card that sticks around after a harsh rule or something along those lines. So that's the basic idea. Bladecrafter Shade itself is like an okay to reasonably strong card. It has like sort of a rise to the challenge on a stick type thing going on where you can get a weapon in like an armory type setup. There seems to be a bit more association with like armory type stuff, and also the card defends your armory cards because when it dies, it allows you to tutor again, so people are not likely to want to attack into it, meaning that you're more likely to get your relic weapons going, and that's the kind of thing that you want to do if you want to reset up armory. We're also going to see some other cards that do that armory type stuff. In fact, there's a new stranger that I think we forgot to get to, and we'll try to grab that afterwards. So, another example, Fear Tracker. Summon deals 3 damage to the enemy player, and you gain 3 health, but has corrupted 4. So this card is a 5/4, and when you summon it, deals 3 to the enemy player, you gain 3 health. When it dies, it becomes a 0/4, and then you can pay 4 to get that damage ability again. So pretty powerful card for 5. Actually, this compares pretty favorably to the Kirin, the 2/4 that Razor Quill, which was around for a while in draft environments, and I think that this is a really strong draft card because A, it's got a lot of stats on it, and B, it has the double hit of 3 damage, gain 3 life, which is really, really a powerful effect. I actually think that like this kind of effect on a unit is pretty dangerous, and this card should actually be pretty strong in Expedition as well. So here's the Fear Tracker Shade, same sort of deal, 0/4, end of your turn gets -1, pay 4, sacrifice to deal 3, and you gain 3 health. So they'll always have the same text as the card that they're on, but the traded version will be a nightmare. It'll have 0 power and get that negative ability. So yeah, it's an interesting mechanic. It's pretty easy to grasp once you have the basics down. You'll always know what the token is going to look like, but it's still something that you have to keep track of. All right, now for my least favorite of the 3, we have the Purge Driver. Oh, here's the Purge Driver Shade. Purge Driver, summon, silence, and kill an enemy unit with more than 1 faction, corrupted 5. So it's a Ravenous Chupacabra type thing where you have a unit with a kill ability that also silences as long as the unit has more than 1 faction, which is a 3-color set, so there's going to be a lot of that, and also Argenport has access to Cast into Shadow. So, like, yeah, this card does a lot. It's also a paladin, so it has a tribal theme going on, which is, yeah, that's very good. It's a really strong card. It's probably the strongest of the 3 that we've shown so far. In fact, it's definitely the strongest of the 3 we've shown so far, although that 4-drop 5/4 does have some interesting advantages in aggressive decks. Yeah, this card kills a lot of different things, and it kills them very, very well. It makes sure that things don't come back in the void. It kills hybrid cards, and then the corrupted version sticks around for only a little while, but you can pay 5 to do the whole thing all over again, which honestly, that's actually pretty expensive to kill a unit with more than 1 faction, so you might not even want to do that. You might want to let the Purge Driver Shade chump block something or do something along those lines, but it's still a card that as a 2/2 gets a significant amount of value and can also keep the board clear of hybrid cards, particularly big expensive hybrid cards, for a very, very long time. Yeah, there's a Patrick Sullivan rant on Ravenous Chupacabra that's kind of coming to mind here. You're probably going to see it linked a lot if you are frequenting the Eternal Reddit or something along those lines. This definitely does create like a very heavy amount of removal pressure for hybrid cards in particular, and it makes it very hard to play those hybrid cards into sort of a risk-free environment. Like you are getting really, really good removal in Justice here. This is a very strong card that's got a lot of value attached to it, and like overall, the fact that it hates on only one type of card is not really all that unreasonable, considering that this is the faction that also has access to Cast into Shadow. So like it's gonna make it really hard to play units that don't generate value immediately as a result of this card being out, and also as a result of the removal in this set being pretty good, assuming that Cast into Shadow survives and we see the same sort of thing going around. Like I think that at the moment, like this card has some potential to be pretty disgusting. It definitely sticks around for a while and does a lot of things that are very value oriented. That small body is not enough to say that this is not just an extremely good card that you should be putting in your deck if you want to build a spiky, aggressive paladin list. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this design. I think that overall, like I just would rather not see it. But yeah, there's the thing that Justice has, which is like a really good removal on a stick. Okay, next up we have, I think there's one more, Vernal Mandrake. And Vernal Mandrake is an 8/8 for 7. Summon and transform each of your other unit into random units that cost 1 more. Generally not a beneficial effect. I mean, it's mass unstable form, so if you are playing in the kind of deck that wants to play unstable form, then now you can duplicate it and get more of it. That's kind of exciting, but also the card is, it costs 7, it's triple blue, which makes it even harder to play. You can't really like throw it in with like a lot of your other colors, but it's also like a fairly expensive card, so that's not terribly unreasonable. And it's Corrupted 8, which means that that unit sticks around for a very, very long time, getting steadily weaker and weaker, and also you have the more evil version of it. I really like how this art and this art, like of the two, I actually think that this one is the scarier card. But yeah, so you can get a blocker that sticks around for a really long time, and then that unit can be sacrificed at some point to transform other units into random units that cost 1 more, which could be a benefit for you depending on what your situation is. Overall, this card looks like it's kind of exciting for the stat block and the ability to generate some really interesting, intense random situations. I would not say it's an insanely strong Expedition or Throne card, but it's definitely going to be a little bit of fun to play with, so I have no objection to it. It seems pretty interesting. Yeah, and that's a pretty wild setup. All right, there was one that we missed, so let's talk about that one last. We have one new stranger to be looking at, and it is a very exciting one. This is Strange Blacksmith. Strange Blacksmith is a 4/3. When a player plays a stranger, they draw a weapon from their void, pay 8 and exhaust Strange Blacksmith to deal 3 damage to an enemy, and you gain 3 armor. So yeah, not unreasonable. You definitely get some pretty sweet benefits out of this. Most notably, this is a 4/3 unit that just as soon as you play it, draws a weapon from your void, which I don't think that there's a version of that card that exists yet, and that seems like an insanely powerful armory card in general. Like, this is a soldier. It's not even that it's a stranger, it's just a soldier that like you can play that gets you a free weapon back from your void, which yeah, you want to do that in Throne for Auric Runehammers, for any type of relic weapon that you're playing. You want to do that in Expedition, and you want to do that in Draft. All of these places, Strange Blacksmith is actually really quite powerful, assuming that its ability does trigger on its own play, which I guess I haven't confirmed that for sure. But it certainly seems like this is something where, including this one, the Strange Blacksmith should pull a weapon back from your void. Yeah, if that's so, this card's insanely strong. If not, it's still a pretty reasonable 4/3 that like actually gets some reasonable benefits as well. So seems cool. Overall, doesn't seem like a bad unit by any means, and that ability to deal 3 and gain 3 health is certainly a reasonable power sink that allows you to kind of effectively use the card in a lot of different ways. Yeah, I think this card's pretty cool. There's a lot of good things happening with it, and overall it seems like you get just a lot of bang for your buck, as well as a reasonable power sink, in addition to what is already a very good and efficient card with a lot of card advantage associated with it. So yeah, that's looking very, very good. Things are looking good for Strangers, things are looking good for Justice, and things are looking good for any sort of like armory setup in the new set. I am not as excited by this batch of spoilers as I have been by previous ones, but I'm certainly looking forward to playing with all of the new cards in Echoes of Eternity. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'm on Twitch, YouTube, and Patreon as LocoPojo, and you can find me there anytime you like. So see you all later. Feel free to like or subscribe, and I'll see you next time with more Eternal Spoilers. Cheers.